Tonight, we quietly step into a world that is very far away, and yet, in the softest sense, not so different from our own. We are going back a very long time, more than 2,000 years, to a place where the evenings were warm and still, where the smell of olive oil and wood smoke drifted through open doorways, and where a simple dinner, prepared with patient hands and unhurried attention, was the center of the whole day. There is no rush here. There never was. We are going to a small household somewhere in the hills of ancient Greece, and we are going to sit with these people quietly and watch the day unfold from its slow beginning all the way to its slow and gentle close. You do not need to remember anything. You do not need to hold on to any fact or any date. You are only here to rest and to listen and to let the warmth of a very old kitchen settle over you like a familiar cloth. The world we are entering is not grand. It is not a palace or a great temple. It is simply a home, a modest house built of pale stone, set into a hillside where the earth is dry and the soil is thin, and the air in the evening carries just a touch of the sea, even from a distance. The house belongs to a family of ordinary means, people who work steadily through every day and who find their pleasures in small things, in the shade of an afternoon, in the weight of a full water jar carried home from the well, in the first taste of bread that has cooled just enough to hold in your hands. These are not famous people. Their names will not appear in any history that was ever written down, but they lived, and they cooked, and they ate together, and the rhythms of their days were steady and quiet, and full of a kind of unspoken contentment that is very easy to feel if you sit still and listen. So let us begin slowly. There is no hurry here. The morning comes without announcement. There is no sudden brightness, no sharp change. The sky above the hills lightens by degrees, moving from the deep blue-black of the night through a long gray softness that has no name, and then so gradually that it is almost impossible to say when it happens. The first pale gold begins to show along the ridge to the east. The birds in the olive trees know before the light arrives. They begin their small sounds in the dark, and those sounds carry through the still air with great clarity, each note distinct and unhurried, as if the birds too understand that there is nothing to rush toward, only this, the slow turning of one more day. Inside the house, the first person to stir is the woman who manages the household. Her name, for our purposes tonight, might be something like Demetria, a name that carries in it the sound of the earth goddess Demeter, she of grain and harvest, and the steady cycles of growing. Demetria wakes before the light is full. She does not wake dramatically. She simply opens her eyes in the dimness of the sleeping room and lies still for a moment, listening. She has been waking this way for as long as she can remember, and the few minutes she spends lying quietly before she rises are not wasted time. They are a kind of preparation, a soft and wordless gathering of herself before the day begins its gentle demands. The sleeping room is small and plain. The walls are smoothed plaster, the color of cream, and in the growing light they take on a faint warmth that is almost golden. There is a wooden bed frame strung with rope to support the sleeping mat, and the mat is stuffed with dried grasses and a small amount of wool, and it is not luxurious, but it is comfortable enough, and Demetria has slept on it for so many years that its particular softness is entirely familiar to her. There is a small oil lamp on a shelf near the door, its wick burned down now to almost nothing. A tiny thread of smoke rising from it into the still air of the room. There are folded cloths on a wooden chest near the wall. There is a pair of simple sandals on the floor beside the bed. That is nearly everything in this room, and the simplicity of it is not a hardship. It is just the ordinary plainness of a life that has never needed much in the way of objects to feel whole. Demetria rises quietly, taking care not to disturb her husband, who is still sleeping deeply, his breathing slow and even. She wraps a long length of linen cloth around herself, pinning it at the shoulders in the simple way she has done 10,000 times before, and she steps out of the sleeping room and into the central courtyard of the house, where the sky above is just beginning to show its first true color. Not much changes in a morning like this. The courtyard is the heart of the house, open to the sky, floored with flat stones worn smooth by years of feet passing over them, bordered on all sides by the low walls of the various rooms. The sleeping rooms, the storage room, the workroom where the spinning and weaving happen, and at the far end, the kitchen. There is a small altar in one corner of the courtyard, very simple, just a low flat stone with a shallow depression worn into its surface, where offerings are left for the household gods. Near the altar, a fig tree grows in a large clay pot, its leaves already pale green and papery in the heat of summer, its small, unripe fruits hanging in quiet clusters. The fig tree is very old. Demetria's mother planted it when she was a young woman. Demetria waters it every morning without thinking about it, the way you do things that have become part of the very fabric of how a day feels. The air in the courtyard is cool and still and faintly scented with the dryness of stone and with something else, the faintest trace of the herbs growing in a small clay pot by the kitchen door. Thyme, mostly. A little bit of oregano. These plants are always there, through every season, their small, gray-green leaves holding the concentrated warmth of 100 summers. Demetria pauses beside them, as she always does, touching the leaves of the thyme plant lightly with her fingertips, and the oil from the crushed leaves rises up immediately, sharp and clean and deeply familiar, and the smell of it is, in its own modest way, one of the most reliable pleasures of her mornings. She goes to the large clay storage jar near the kitchen door, the pythos, big as a child, sunk partway into the earth to keep its contents cool, and lifts the heavy stone lid just far enough to dip a cup inside. The water she draws out is cool and slightly mineral, with the faint taste of the clay jar itself, and she drinks it slowly, standing in the courtyard in the early light, looking up at the narrow strip of brightening sky above her. The cool water moves through her in a quiet way, and she sets the cup down on the low wall beside the jar and goes into the kitchen to begin the first small work of the day. The kitchen is a low-ceilinged room with a single high window that admits a bar of pale morning light. The floor here is also stone, but darker, stained with years of oil and smoke, warm underfoot in a way that the courtyard stones are not. In the center of the kitchen floor, there is a hearth, not a built-up fireplace with a chimney, as you might imagine, but a simple raised clay platform, perhaps knee-high, with a shallow basin on top where the fire is built. Above the hearth, the ceiling is blackened with years of smoke, and the walls nearby are dark too, and the darkness of it does not feel grim, but rather rich and close and warm, the way old wood feels, or old stone that has been near a fire for a very long time. There are hooks in the low beams above the hearth from which various things hang. A bunch of dried herbs, almost spent, their leaves papery and fragrant. A small clay pot sealed with cloth and string. A bundle of dry wood laid along the beam for future kindling, where it stays dry even through the dampness of winter. There are clay pots of various sizes stacked against one wall, an amphora of olive oil leaning in a corner, and a large clay bowl sitting on a low wooden table near the window, dusted still with yesterday's flour. Demetria rebuilds the fire slowly. The embers from the previous evening are still faintly alive, a bed of pale gray ash, with here and there a small orange glow when she crouches close and blows very gently. She adds first the finest of the dry grass and wood shavings she keeps in a clay pot for this purpose, blowing softly, watching the glow deepen, then brighten, then spread into a small tongue of flame. Then she adds the smaller sticks, crossing them carefully, and then the larger pieces of wood, and the fire grows quietly, without drama, settling into itself, with the small sounds that a well-made fire makes, the occasional soft pop of wood releasing its moisture, the low, steady voice of the flame itself. The smoke rises toward the high window and drifts out, and the kitchen begins to fill with the smell of it, not unpleasant, clean and dry, and faintly resinous, the smell of pine and olive wood burning together. There is something about the lighting of a morning fire that has no equivalent in any other action of the day. It is the first real warmth the kitchen receives, and as the fire builds, the room slowly changes around it, the shadows pulling back, the corners becoming visible, the hanging herbs catching a little light and glowing a dull silver green. Demetria crouches beside the hearth for a little while after the fire is established, not because there is anything more to do, but because this is pleasant, this particular warmth on the face and hands in the cool of the morning, the sense of the day beginning properly around the solid fact of a fire that is burning well. Slowly, she rises and begins the first preparations. Bread is the center of everything in this household, as it is in nearly every household in this part of the world, in this long ago time. Not bread as a side note, not bread as an accompaniment, but bread as the main substance of every meal, the thing around which everything else arranges itself. The grain from which the bread is made, mostly barley, with some wheat when it can be afforded, or when the harvest has been generous, is stored in a large clay container in the storage room, and Demetria goes there now to measure out what she needs for the day. The storage room smells of grain and dust, and the particular dry sweetness of things kept in the dark, and she moves through it with the ease of someone who knows every object by its position and its weight, and does not need light to find what she is looking for. She carries the grain back to the kitchen in a shallow clay bowl, and she sits down on a low wooden stool beside the stone quern, the hand mill, that sits on the floor near the wall. The quern is 2 pieces of stone, a lower and an upper, and Demetria places a small amount of grain on the lower stone, takes hold of the handle fixed into the upper stone, and begins to grind. The motion is a long circular push and pull, steady and unhurried, and the grain between the stones is slowly crushed into a rough flour that falls in a pale stream around the edges of the lower stone. The sound of the grinding is a dry whisper, a soft stone on stone hiss that is almost musical in its steadiness. This is the first sound of real work in the morning, and it carries through the quiet house like a kind of low heartbeat. Grinding grain by hand takes time. There is no shortcut here, and Demetria has never expected one. The work is repetitive, and the motion is familiar, and her mind is free to drift during it, or to settle into a pleasant blankness, or simply to follow the small sensory details of the moment. The warmth growing in the kitchen, the smell of the fire, the light shifting as the morning advances, the slow accumulation of flour in the bowl she has placed beneath the quern to catch it. Her hands know this works so completely that they do not need her full attention. They simply move, and the stone moves, and the grain becomes flour, and time passes in a very ordinary and comfortable way. It takes the better part of an hour to grind enough flour for the household's bread. By the time she is done, the morning light through the high window has strengthened, and the household is beginning to wake. She can hear the voices of her children, two of them, a boy of perhaps 9 and a girl of perhaps 12, somewhere in the courtyard, the quiet murmur of early morning talk, unhurried and vague, the way children speak when they have just woken and the day has not yet made any real demands of them. Her husband, she knows from the sounds, is also moving now, his feet on the stone floor of the sleeping room, the creak of the wooden chest lid as he opens it to take out his belt or his cloak. Demetria adds water to the flour in the large clay bowl, a little at a time, working it in with her hands. She is not making a fine leavened bread this morning. That kind of bread, which the Greeks call artos, requires a small amount of saved dough from the previous baking, left overnight to ferment and develop its slow lift, and she has this tucked in a small covered bowl nearby, ready to use. She adds the leavening, working it into the wet dough with patient pressure, folding and pressing, feeling the texture change under her hands as the gluten develops and the mixture becomes something coherent and elastic. Bread dough is a pleasurable thing to work with because it is responsive. It gives and resists in turn, and the hands learn to read its qualities in the way that a craftsperson learns any material. Too wet and it will flatten without rising. Too dry and it will crack. Just right, and it holds its shape with a gentle resilience that is almost satisfying in itself. She shapes the dough into a round form and sets it on a clay baking tile near the fire to rest, covering it with another clay vessel inverted over it, so that the warmth of the hearth begins its slow work on the dough, helping the leavening to push the mass of it gently, imperceptibly upward. This will take some time, and Demetria leaves it there and turns her attention to other things, the way you move through a kitchen in a familiar morning. From one patient task to the next, none of them urgent, all of them part of the same long, unhurried rhythm. The olive oil is poured out now from one of the large amphorae into a smaller clay vessel that is easier to handle. Tipping the heavy amphora carefully, a slow gold stream running out, faintly fragrant, with the particular green-gold color of oil pressed not too long ago. Olive oil is perhaps the single most important substance in this household, as it is in almost every household in ancient Greece. It is used in cooking, certainly, but also in lamps for light, in the cleaning and conditioning of skin and hair, in the preservations of certain foods, in religious offerings, in the finishing of finished wood. The olive tree and its oil permeate every aspect of life here so completely that it is almost impossible to imagine the household without them. The oil in this vessel is from the family's own trees, a small grove of ancient trees on the hillside above the house, gnarled and slow and enormously productive, trees that were already old when Demetria's grandmother was young, trees whose roots go deep into the dry, rocky soil and whose silver gray leaves turn in the morning breeze with a quiet shimmer. The smell of the oil as it pours is clean and faintly fruity, and it settles into the small clay vessel with a stillness that feels permanent, though it will be used entirely by the end of the day. Demetria sets it near the hearth, where it will stay liquid and easy to pour, and she adds a little water to a small clay pot, setting it over the coals to begin its slow warming for the morning's first pot of something warm. Not much changes in the rhythm of a morning kitchen. The fire burns steadily. The bread rests under its covering. The water heats without hurrying. Outside, the sun has now fully cleared the eastern ridge, and the courtyard is filling with light, the flat stones brightening from gray to a warm, dusty beige, the fig tree casting its soft, dappled shade in one corner. The children are sitting on the courtyard wall now, eating the previous day's leftover bread with a little olive oil and a pinch of coarse salt, talking in their unhurried way about nothing in particular. Their voices drift into the kitchen as a comfortable sound, a background to Demetria's work, not demanding attention. The morning meal in this household is modest. There is no tradition here of elaborate breakfasting. The large meal, the meal that requires real preparation and real time and real ceremony, comes in the evening. The morning is for eating just enough to begin the work of the day, and what is eaten is simple: bread with oil, perhaps a few dried figs or olives, a little cheese if there is some, and something warm to drink, which today will be a thin barley porridge called kykeon, made by stirring water and ground barley together with a little wine and whatever herbs are at hand. This is an ancient drink, older even than the civilization that makes it. A simple, nourishing mixture that fuels the body without asking the stomach to work too hard in the early morning. Demetria prepares the kykeon with the same practiced ease as everything else she does in this kitchen. She measures the ground barley into the warming water, a generous amount, and stirs it with a long, smooth stick of olive wood that has been polished by years of this exact use into a beautiful, simple tool, its handle worn to a perfect fit for her hand. She adds a small amount of the wine that sits in a clay jug near the wall. The wine is dark and slightly thick, not the refined kind, but a rough country wine, somewhat sour, diluted always with water, because that is how it is always drunk here, pure wine being considered the province of the very drunk and the very foolish. She adds a pinch of dried thyme, and the smell of it entering the warm water rises like a brief, warm cloud, and then the whole thing is stirred steadily until the barley has absorbed the liquid and become a thin, pale, fragrant porridge. She carries the pot to the courtyard and sets it on the low wall, and the children come and dip their cups and drink the warm kikion in the morning light, holding their cups in both hands the way children do, their faces close to the steam, their eyes still holding the blurriness of early morning. Her husband comes out of the sleeping room, fully dressed now, his wool cloak pinned at the shoulder, and he takes his cup of kaikion and leans against the courtyard wall and drinks it looking up at the sky, and it is impossible to know exactly what he is thinking, because he is simply looking at the sky the way people have always looked at the sky in the morning, not for any reason, only because it is there, and because the morning light is on it, and because there is a moment in every morning when the world feels both very large and very manageable at the same time. His name might be Nikias, which is a common enough name in this time and place, meaning something to do with victory, though there is nothing particularly victorious about Nikias's daily life. He is a man who works his small plot of land, tends his olive trees, keeps a few goats on the upper hillside with the help of his son, and goes sometimes to the agora of the nearest town to trade or to hear what is being said. He is not a man of great education or great wealth, but he is not poor either, and he moves through his days with a quiet steadiness that matches the pace of this house and this landscape. He finishes his kaikion, says something brief and calm to his wife about the work he intends to do today. The lower terrace of the olive grove needs clearing after the recent winds, and he sets down his cup and he goes out through the main door of the house into the morning. The house settles quietly after his departure. The children drift off to their morning tasks, the boy to help his father in the grove, the girl to sit in the workroom where the loom stands against the wall, its half-finished cloth waiting patiently. Demetria is left in the kitchen with the slow fire and the resting bread and the small ordinary work of the morning, and the quiet of it is entirely comfortable. She moves from the kitchen to the courtyard and back again, tending to various small things, bringing in more water from the large storage jar, checking the bread to see if it is rising as it should. It is, the dough rounded now and slightly domed under its cover. Sweeping the courtyard floor with a bundle of stiff grass tied to a stick, the dry sound of it scratching across the stones as pleasant and rhythmic as the grinding had been. In the courtyard, near the small altar, she pauses and adds a pinch of grain and a small pour of oil to the shallow stone, murmuring something very quietly, a brief acknowledgement of the household gods, Hestia above all, the goddess of the hearth and the home, whose presence is felt in every fire that burns and every meal that is prepared. This is not a formal prayer. It is more like a greeting, the kind you offer to someone who is always present, whose presence you take for granted in the best sense, as a constant and reliable good that runs beneath the ordinary surface of everything. Hestia does not demand drama. She is worshipped through the simple act of keeping the fire burning, of tending the house, of preparing food with care. In this sense, everything Demetria does from the moment she rises is, in some small way, an act of devotion. The morning slides forward, the sun climbs. The shadow of the fig tree moves across the courtyard floor with a slowness that is only perceptible if you watch it without looking away, and even then it seems more like a feeling than a measurable motion. The kitchen smells now of the fire and the bread and the last faint warmth of the morning kaikion, and the herbs by the door have been warmed by the sun and are giving off their oils into the still air, and the whole compound of smells is deeply pleasant in a way that needs no analysis, only reception. It is time now to think about the evening meal, because the evening meal requires thinking about in the morning. This is one of the organizing facts of daily life in an ancient Greek household. The dinner, the deipnon, does not happen without long preparation, and long preparation requires ingredients, and ingredients require either a trip to the market in town or a careful consideration of what is already in the house. Demetria goes to the storage room and stands in its cool dimness and takes account of what she has. There is a good olive oil, plenty of it. There is dried barley and some wheat flour. There are dried lentils, a whole clay pot of them, smooth and pale brown, and another pot of dried fava beans, small, wrinkled, dark. There is a small jar of honey, thick and almost crystallized, smelling of thyme flowers. There are dried figs on a string hanging from a nail. There are olives preserved in brine in a sealed clay vessel, just a few handfuls, good quality, from last autumn's pressing. There is a hard, dry cheese, wrapped in cloth, something like what we might call feta, pressed and salted, crumbling at the edges. There are dried onions, braided together and hanging from a hook, their papery outer skins rustling faintly in the draught from the door. She has fish. She has this in mind because her husband brought some home 2 days ago from a friend near the coast, not fresh fish, which would not keep so well in this heat, but small fish that have been dried and salted, packed in a flat clay container with a lid, and these are very good, dried over smoky fires by the sea until they are firm and intensely flavored, and when soaked in water and then cooked, they give up a deep, savory taste that transforms a pot of legumes or a simple sauce entirely. She has herbs in the garden, thyme, oregano, a small amount of dried mint. She has wine. She has the oil and the salt and the dried aromatics that form the quiet backbone of every meal she has ever prepared. For tonight, she decides, she will make a pot of lentil soup, fakes, the Greek word that has not changed so very much over the centuries, and she will cook the dried fish separately with some of the preserved olives and a pour of wine, and there will be bread, of course, and she will make a small amount of something sweet at the end with the dried figs and a spoonful of honey and perhaps a little sesame, because tonight there may be a neighbor or two who come by in the evening, as sometimes happens, and it is right to offer something extra when guests appear, something that signals welcome, something sweet. The lentils she takes out of their pot and rinses in a little water, then sets aside in the clay cooking vessel with water to soak. Lentils do not require as long a soaking as the dried beans. The beans would need all night, which is why those are set aside for another day. The lentils will soften in an hour or two and be ready for the pot by midday. She adds a little more wood to the fire, building it up to a steadier heat now that the morning is fully here and the need for the quiet warmth has given way to the need for actual cooking. The fire responds well, the flames rising and settling into a reliable rhythm, the coals below them accumulating a glowing depth that will sustain the cooking through the rest of the morning and into the afternoon. Slowly, the kitchen comes into its full working life. The bread is ready to go into the fire now. It has been resting and rising for long enough, and the dough has a slightly puffy, yielding quality when she presses it gently with a finger. She rakes the coals to the side of the hearth with a long iron tool, clearing a space in the center, and slides the baking tile with the bread on it into that cleared space, then rakes the hot coals around it on all sides and over the top, covering the whole thing with a great clay dome. The klibanos that sits over the bread like an earthenware hat and traps the heat completely. What happens inside the klibanos is slow and sure, and smells, after a while, extraordinarily good. The heat surrounds the bread from all sides, and the crust begins to form, and the moisture inside the dough steams and presses outward, and the whole round mass slowly firms and colors and rises its final small amount. Bread baked this way has a thick, slightly smoky crust and a dense, moist interior, and it will keep well for most of the day, and tomorrow what remains will be soaked in water or oil to soften it and eaten that way. The smell of baking bread fills the kitchen now and drifts into the courtyard, and it is one of those smells that seems to carry its own history in it, a smell that is the same in this ancient kitchen as it was 10,000 years ago, as it is in any kitchen in the world where bread is being baked in a hot enclosed space, because it is simply the smell of grain transformed by heat and moisture and time. And that transformation has always smelled exactly like this: warm, faintly sweet, deeply nourishing, like a promise the morning makes about the afternoon. Not much changes in the hours between the baking of the bread and the serious beginning of the evening meal's preparation. The day moves through its middle arc in the way that summer days in this part of the world do, slowly warming toward a noon heat that is too bright and heavy to move through comfortably, settling afterward into a long, dry afternoon that softens by degrees as the sun begins its descent and the shadows grow long and cool. This middle part of the day is not a time of rest, exactly, but it is a quieter time, a time for tasks that do not require fire or heavy work, a time for moving slowly through the household and the small surrounding garden, tending to things, checking on things, carrying out the 100 small maintenance tasks that a house and a family require without making particular demands. The garden behind the house is not large. It is a dry, carefully tended space where the soil has been worked and enriched over many years with ash from the kitchen fire and whatever organic matter could be found, and where certain plants have established themselves with great tenacity. A row of onions still in the ground, their tops flopped over with the heat. A few woody stems of what will be garlic come winter. A struggling cucumber vine that has produced 3 cucumbers this summer, which is enough to feel like a gift. There is a wild herb bed along the wall, the thyme and oregano, self-seeding and established now, spreading a little more each year across the dry ground. And near the wall, in the shadiest spot in the garden, a large spreading bush of rue, dark-leafed and strongly scented, kept more for its usefulness as a medicinal plant than for cooking, though a few leaves sometimes find their way into dishes. Demetria picks a handful of fresh thyme from the herb bed, pinching the stems just below a joint so that the plant will branch and grow more thickly. She picks a few sprigs of oregano too, and holds them together in one hand, their combined smell rising up around her as she walks back to the kitchen, the smell of dried Greek hillsides in the heat, sharp and clean, the smell that anyone who has ever been to the Mediterranean in summer carries in their memory afterwards as a kind of distilled essence of the place. She adds the herbs to the lentils, which are now in their water over a low part of the fire, softening slowly. An onion, sliced, not finely, just into rough half moons, goes in next, along with a generous pour of olive oil that floats on the surface and will work its way into the broth as the lentils cook. A pinch of salt, a small pour of wine vinegar, which sharpens everything and adds a brightness that balances the earthiness of the legumes. The lentil pot will cook now for a long time over the low fire, checked occasionally, stirred from time to time with the olive wood spoon, its contents slowly transforming from the bright clean smell of raw legumes soaking in herb-scented water to the deep, rich, savory smell of a fully cooked lentil soup, thickened with its own dissolved starches, fragrant with oil and onion and the particular earthiness that lentils develop when they have been cooking in a clay pot over a wood fire for a long time. This is the smell that begins in the kitchen in the late morning and drifts through the courtyard and out into the air around the house, and it is unmistakably the smell of dinner being made, which is its own kind of comfort, its own quiet signal that the day is moving through its hours in the right direction. There is a pleasantness to a pot that cooks without needing constant attention. You can hear it from the courtyard, a low, intermittent sound, a soft bubble breaking the surface of the liquid every now and then, less frequent than a full boil, more like a slow breath. When Demetria comes back into the kitchen to tend the fire or to do some other task, she can hear the lentils and smell them, and the sound and the smell together form a kind of companionable presence, as if the cooking pot were another occupant of the kitchen, one whose conversation consists entirely of these low, soft sounds and these warm fragrances, and whose company is entirely welcome. The bread comes out of the klibanos in its own time. Demetria knows when it is done partly by the smell, the sweetness of the crust, and the deeper fullness of the interior baked grain, and partly by the color when she lifts the dome and looks at it, a rich golden brown on the crust, almost dark at the very top where the heat concentrated. She sets it aside on the wooden table, covered lightly with a cloth, to cool, and it steams very faintly as it cools, small wisps rising from the crust and disappearing into the warm air of the kitchen. A freshly baked round of bread is, in this time and place, one of the most beautiful objects that can exist in a kitchen. Its simplicity is absolute. It is flour and water and a little leavening and salt, shaped into a round and subjected to heat. And yet what it becomes is so much more than the sum of those parts that it feels, each time, like a small miracle that the kitchen performs. She resists the temptation to cut it while it is still warm, because the interior needs time to set, and cutting warm bread tears it, rather than slicing it cleanly. So she leaves it to cool and goes about the other work of the afternoon. The afternoon is long and warm and quiet. The children come back from their respective occupations and drift through the house. The boy, sunburned and dusty from the olive grove, drinks deeply from the water jar and disappears into the sleeping room for a rest. The girl continues at the loom for a while, the soft rhythmic clack of the shuttle in addition to the kitchen sounds, and then she too rests, lying on her mat in the cool shade of the sleeping room, and the house becomes very still in the deepest part of the afternoon when the heat is its greatest and the whole world seems to pause and wait for the sun to begin its descent. This pause in the afternoon is a kind of gift. In the deep heat of a Greek summer, the hours between roughly midday and the mid-afternoon are too hot for comfortable work, and so there is a natural respite built into the day, not laziness, but wisdom, the acknowledgement that the body has its limits and the sun its seasons, and that resting when rest is needed is simply the right way to live. Demetria herself sits in the shade of the courtyard for a little while during this stillest hour, her hands occupied with the mending of a piece of cloth, her needle moving slowly and without urgency through the worn fabric, her eyes moving between the cloth and the courtyard and the small strip of sky above, and her mind drifting in that particular way that comes when the hands are busy with something simple and familiar, and the rest of the self is free to go wherever it wishes. The goats are audible occasionally from the upper hillside, their bells carrying down through the hot air in little clusters of sound that arrive and disappear without pattern. A donkey somewhere below in the valley makes its wonderful, absurd sound. A pair of swallows cut across the narrow band of courtyard sky, impossibly fast, gone before the eye can fully register them. The thyme in the pot by the kitchen door releases its oil slowly into the afternoon heat, and the air in the courtyard has a quality that is very particular to this place and this time of day, dry and warm and full of the smell of stone and herbs, and the very faint sweetness of the olive wood burning low in the kitchen hearth. In this house, in this afternoon, in this very ordinary passage of time, there is a kind of fullness that requires no embellishment. Things are simply what they are, and what they are is sufficient. The bread is cooling on the wooden table. The lentils are cooking in their pot. The family is resting through the heat of the day. The sun is slowly moving across its arc, and in a few hours, when the air begins to cool and the shadows lengthen and the quality of the light shifts from white hot and direct to the warm slanted gold of the late afternoon, the household will come back to life and the final preparations for the evening will begin. It is the most ordinary day imaginable. Nothing unusual will happen. No one famous will appear. No great decision will be made. And yet, and this is perhaps the most important thing to carry with you from this kitchen, the ordinariness of it is not its emptiness. It is fullness. It is the fullness of a love that has found its shape and its rhythm and has settled into both with a quiet completeness that is in its own way a kind of grace. Not much changes in the afternoon. It never does. And that unchanging quality is part of what makes the afternoon restful, the sense that the world is content to hold its breath for a little while, that the day will resume in its own time, and that nothing is required of you in the meantime except this: to be still and to rest and to let the warm air settle over you. The shadows lengthen. The quality of the light shifts. The white-hot, flattening noonlight becomes something softer, something that comes in at an angle and makes the pale stone of the courtyard glow with a warmth it did not have at midday, and the dust in the air catches this slanted light and holds it, and everything in the courtyard and on the hillside above looks for a little while as if it has been touched by gold. This is the light that painters try to capture and rarely quite manage, the light that everyone who has ever been outdoors in the late afternoon in a warm, dry landscape carries in their memory as a feeling rather than a sight, a feeling of warmth and lengthening and the approach of something quiet and pleasant. Demetria comes back to the kitchen with renewed energy, the energy that comes after a rest and in the cooling of the later afternoon, and she looks at what she has and thinks about what still needs to be done. The lentil soup is progressing beautifully. She lifts the lid of the pot and stirs it, and the steam rises thick and fragrant, and the lentils have entirely lost their individual shape now and become part of a thick, silky, deeply flavored broth. And she tastes it with a small clay spoon and adjusts the salt, and it is already very good. The fish, she takes the dried, salted fish out of their container and places them in a bowl of cold water to soak, which will begin to draw out the excess salt and soften the flesh back towards something that can be cooked. Small fish, preserved this way, dried and salt cured in the sun and smoke of the coast, are one of the great constants of the ancient Greek diet. Fresh fish is wonderful when you can get it, and in the coastal towns and cities, the fish markets are wonderful places, full of every kind of sea creature that can be caught and carried quickly to shore. Tuna and mackerel and sea bass and the silvery small fish that school in great numbers in the clear, warm Mediterranean and can be caught in bulk when the weather and the season cooperate. But here, an hour's walk from the coast, fresh fish is a special thing, a treat, and the salt-dried fish that can be stored and carried and kept for weeks is the more common presence in the kitchen. It is not a lesser thing, this preserved fish. It has its own intense quality, its own concentrated savory depth that fresh fish does not have, and when it is prepared properly, soaked gently, then cooked with care, it is genuinely delicious. She will cook the fish tonight with the preserved olives, a pour of wine, some oil, and the fresh herbs in a wide, shallow clay vessel over the fire. This cooking method is simple and relatively fast. The fish does not need long over the heat, only enough time to warm through fully and absorb the flavors of the oil and wine and herbs, the flesh becoming something soft and yielding, the briny intensity of the preservation meeting the brightness of the wine and the green freshness of the thyme. It is a dish of few ingredients, but those ingredients are very good, and the combination of them has been known and practiced in this part of the world for so long that it has become a kind of common property, not anyone's recipe, but everyone's, passed down not in writing, but in the doing of it, in the watching of a mother prepare it, and the preparation of it yourself 1,000 times, until it lives in your hands the way all the best knowledge lives, without needing to be recalled, because it has never been forgotten. The olives. She takes a small handful out of their brine and drains them in her palm and smells them. They smell of the brine and of themselves, of the particular fruity depth that olives and salt take on over time, and they are plump and good. She sets them aside near the clay cooking vessel. The wine, a small cup, poured from the jug, the oil a steady pour into the vessel, generous. She is building the base of the dish before the fish even touches the heat, letting the oil warm in the vessel over the coals, adding the thyme and oregano directly into the oil so that the heat draws out their oils too, and the kitchen fills with a smell that is one of the great smell combinations of this cuisine. Olive oil and herbs in a warm clay pot over a wood fire, a smell that carries in it the whole landscape of these dry hills, all of the sun and heat and stony earth that made these plants and this oil distilled now into this warm, fragrant, rising cloud. The fish goes in carefully, laid flat in the oil and herbs, and Demetria does not move them, because the fish will stick if you try to turn them before they have had enough time in the heat to release naturally. And patience here is not just a virtue, but a practical necessity. She pours the small cup of wine over the fish. It hisses and steams when it hits the hot oil, a dramatic small sound and a sudden cloud of fragrant steam that subsides almost immediately. And then she sets the olives around the fish and covers the vessel with a clay lid and reduces the fire beneath it to a slower heat, and the whole thing will cook now gently and quietly until the fish is done, which will not take very long. The bread has cooled. She cuts it now, using a simple stone blade that is not quite a knife in the way we would understand the word, a piece of flint napped to an edge, set into a short wooden handle, and the bread cuts cleanly, the crust giving a dry, solid sound as the blade passes through it, and the interior of the bread is exactly as it should be, close-grained and moist, cream-colored, smelling of grain, and the faint sourness of the leavening, with a slight elasticity that tells you it was made with good flour properly worked. She stacks the thick slices on a flat clay plate and sets them near the table where the meal will be served. The meal will be served in the courtyard this evening, as it often is in the warm months. There is a low wooden table there, rectangular, set on legs that are only slightly taller than a person's knee when sitting on the floor, because in this household the custom is to sit on cushions on the ground or on low stools rather than on chairs, and the table is proportioned accordingly. The table will be set simply, the bread on its clay plate, the lentil soup in a large serving bowl from which each person dips their own cup or bowl, the fish on its cooking vessel, and beside each person's place, a shallow cup for wine mixed with water. She has brought water from the storage jar into a large clay pitcher, and she has set out the wine jug, and she has found the wine cups, plain, undecorated clay, small enough to hold easily in one hand, slightly rough on the outside from the natural texture of the clay, smooth on the inside. These cups are old. They have been in this household for many years. Some have small chips or hairline cracks that have been repaired with nothing at all, simply tolerated, worked around. They are entirely ordinary objects, and they are well loved in the way that ordinary objects become well loved, through constant use, through the habitual pleasure of picking them up and holding them and using them for the purpose they were made for. For the sweet end of the meal, Demetria prepares her fig dish. She takes a dozen of the dried figs from their string. They are flat and wrinkled and brown, with a slight whitish bloom of natural sugar on their skins, and they are soft enough in the warmth to press easily, and she splits each one open and presses a small bit of walnut meat into the interior of it, closes it back up, and places the stuffed figs in a small clay dish. Over them, she pours a generous spoonful of the thyme honey, which pours with difficulty because of its near crystalline thickness, moving in a slow, golden ribbon that falls over the figs and pools around them in the dish. She adds a pinch of dried sesame seeds. They are tiny and cream-colored and faintly toasty in smell, and they scatter over the figs and honey with a natural randomness that is, for all its casualness, quite beautiful to look at. She covers this dish with a cloth and sets it aside where it will stay cool. The honey deserves a moment of attention because it is one of the most valued things in this kitchen. Honey in ancient Greece is the sweetener, the only real sweetener widely available. Sugar cane is unknown here and will not arrive for many centuries. Honey is gathered from wild hives and from kept bees, and the best Greek honey from the thyme-covered hills of Attica and Hymettus has been famous throughout the ancient world for its exceptional quality and flavor. The honey in this jar is not from the famous hills. This is a country household, and the honey is local, gathered from bees that work the wild thyme and oregano of the immediate hillsides. But it is good honey, fragrant and thick and faintly herbal, with a sweetness that is complex rather than simple, that has a depth and a quality of the land in it. When she tastes a small amount on her finger before sealing the jar back up, there is in the taste a whole compressed summer's worth of hillside flowers and dry, warm air and buzzing industry, and it is very pleasant indeed. The sesame seeds, scattered over the honey and figs, will toast slightly in the residual warmth of the kitchen and add their own note to the small dish. A faint nuttiness, a slight crunch, a tiny detail of texture and flavor that elevates the whole thing from the purely sweet into something with more interest, more dimension. This is how ancient Greek cooking works, in fact, not through elaborate technique or long lists of ingredients, but through the intelligent layering of a few very good things, each one chosen to complement the others, each one contributing something specific that the others do not have. It is a cuisine of clarity, you might say, of directness, of letting very good ingredients speak without overwhelming them. The sun is getting lower. The light on the courtyard stones is fully golden now, and the shadow of the fig tree has stretched itself across most of the courtyard floor, and in its shade it is noticeably cooler, the kind of coolness that the body recognizes and responds to with a slow, grateful easing. The birds are becoming more vocal again after the quiet of the afternoon, swallows in great numbers above the roof, their curved wings cutting the air with effortless precision, their voices a high, bright chatter that is the sound of the late afternoon in a place like this. Somewhere nearby, a turtle dove calls its slow, repetitive sound, two low notes repeated with long pauses between, a sound that has no urgency in it whatsoever, a sound that is pure late afternoon. Nikias returns from the olive grove. He comes through the main door with the dusty, slightly abstracted look of a man who has been working outdoors in the heat for many hours, and he goes directly to the water jar and drinks deeply and then pours water from a smaller jug over his hands and washes them, and then sits down on the courtyard wall and does nothing for a little while except sit and breathe and let the afternoon settle around him. He is not a man of many words after a long day's work, but there is something restful about his stillness in the courtyard, the ease of a body that has done what it set out to do and has come home to the place where rest is possible. He asks about the evening's food in the brief way that people ask about things they already expect will be satisfactory, and Demetria tells him lentil soup, fish with olives, bread, the fig sweetness, and he makes a sound of contentment and leans back against the courtyard wall with his face tilted slightly upward toward the remaining light, and the evening moves on around him. The children returns in their turn, the boy from wherever he spent the last part of his afternoon, the girl from whatever she found to do after the loom, and the courtyard gradually fills with the quiet life of a family reassembling at the end of a day. There is no ceremony to this. It is simply the natural gathering that happens in a household when the work of the day has reached its natural end and the shared meal is approaching, the gravitational pull of the food and the fire drawing everyone inward to the center of the house and the life it contains. The smell coming from the kitchen is now very good, the lentil soup deep and savory, the fish and olives and herbs rising above it in a sharper register, the bread carrying its own dry warmth underneath everything. The honey and figs are somewhere in that compound of smells too, just barely discernible, a sweetness at the edge of everything. Demetria moves between the kitchen and the courtyard, bringing things out, arranging the table. The large bowl of lentil soup, ladled from the clay cooking pot, steaming and thick, a dark olive oil sheen on its surface, where she has drizzled a last pour before serving, and the fresh herbs she has scattered over the top. A few small thyme leaves, a sprig of oregano laid across the center of the bowl, are already turning soft and releasing their smell into the steam. The fish, on its clay cooking vessel, covered loosely with its lid, the bread on its plate, the wine jug and the water jug, the shallow cups for each person. She lights the small clay oil lamp that stands on a stone shelf near the courtyard wall, because the evening will come before dinner is finished, and it is good to have the lamp ready, though it will not be needed for some time yet. The lamp holds a small amount of olive oil and a wick of twisted flax, and when it is lit, it gives off a small, steady flame that is warm and golden, and throws a gentle light that is not at all like the sharp light of the modern world. It is soft and moving. It flickers with every draft of air. It creates more shadow than illumination, and the shadow it creates is warm and close and not unpleasant at all. The family sits for dinner as the sun is setting behind the western hills, and the sky above the courtyard is moving through its final gradations of the day, from the clear, intense blue of the late afternoon through a layering of golds and pinks and a warm gray violet that deepens from the east as the evening comes. It is a beautiful evening sky, but no one in the family is particularly remarking on it, because beautiful evening skies are simply part of what evenings are, and there is no need to comment on what is always present. They sit on their cushions around the low table, and the food is before them, and the light is still warm enough to see by without the lamp, and the evening air carries the first faint coolness of the night, beginning somewhere distant and approaching. The bread is passed first. Demetria takes a piece herself, and Nikias takes a larger piece and breaks it and gives part of it to each of the children. And they all hold their bread and dip it into the lentil soup that has been poured into their individual bowls. And the first tastes of the evening meal are taken in that particular quiet that comes when a meal begins, and the appetite, which has been waiting patiently all day, finally receives what it has been waiting for. The lentil soup is very good. It has had the whole day to develop its flavors over the slow fire, and what began as soaked dried lentils in herb-scented water has become something quite different. A thick, smooth, deeply savory broth that is rich with olive oil and fragrant with thyme and oregano. The onion having entirely dissolved into the background of the whole, giving it a sweetness you can feel more than taste, and the little bit of wine vinegar added early in the cooking has worked its way in and sharpened everything just barely, just enough, so that there is a brightness alongside the earthiness that keeps the whole thing from being too heavy. It is the kind of soup that is satisfying in a very fundamental way, the kind that seems to address some very basic need of the body, not just hunger, but something more than hunger, something like the need for warmth and substance and the familiar. The bread soaked in the lentil broth takes on a whole new quality. The dry, slightly sour bread becomes saturated with the rich liquid and transforms into something soft and yielding and deeply flavored, and the oil from the soup seeps into the bread and coats the palate in a way that prolongs every taste, stretching the pleasure of it out across several moments rather than delivering it all at once. This is the combination that has been eaten in Greek households for thousands of years, and it will be eaten for thousands more, and the pleasure of it is not diminished by its antiquity or its simplicity, but rather deepened by both. The fish is served from its clay vessel, placed in the center of the table for everyone to take from as they wish. The small salt-dried fish, having soaked and then cooked in oil and wine and herbs with the olives, have become something quite wonderful. Their flesh is soft and flaking, giving way at the lightest touch, and they carry the deep saline intensity of their preservation alongside the gentle herbaceousness of the thyme and oregano and the brightness of the wine, and the olives alongside them have given up some of their brininess into the cooking liquid and have become soft and meaty and slightly less sharp than they were at the start. The cooking juices in the bottom of the vessel are fragrant and complex, and the bread is used to soak them up, every last drop, because they are too good to leave. The conversation at dinner is gentle and without agenda. Nikias speaks a little about the work in the olive grove, a stone wall on the lower terrace that needs repair, which he will start tomorrow, and the condition of the trees, which are looking well. The children contribute small pieces of news from their days, the boy talking about something he saw on the hillside, a fox perhaps, moving through the dry grass near the goat pasture, the girl about the weaving, about the pattern she is working on, about how the colors of the thread look in the afternoon light. These are not important matters. They are the ordinary contents of an ordinary day, and they are shared at this table in the way that all such things are shared at all such tables, because the act of sharing them is itself the point, not the information contained in them, but the fact of their being spoken and heard within the circle of this family and this meal. The sky above the courtyard deepens. The last pink fades from the west, and the first stars appear, tentatively at first, and then with more confidence as the blue above darkens toward the true dark of a summer night. The oil lamp, which Nikias lights now with a taper from the kitchen fire, adds its small, warm glow to the table, and the family sits in its light, their faces soft in the flickering warmth, and they continue their dinner and their quiet talk without hurry. Not much changes in an evening like this. The food is eaten slowly, with appreciation, but without drama. More bread is broken, more wine is poured, always diluted with water, always measured, because wine in excess is considered by these people not a pleasure but a disorder, and the moderate drinking of wine mixed with water is itself a civilized act, a way of taking what is good and keeping it good, of enjoying without losing the ability to enjoy. The wine in the cups has a deep dark color in the lamplight, tending toward rust and amber, and its taste is rough and slightly tannic but pleasant. The sourness of the dilution and the fruit of the grape in balance, and the warmth it gives is gentle and real. There is, in this part of the ancient Greek world, a custom that is not fully observed in a modest household like this one, the symposium, the drinking party, which in its grandest form involves reclining on couches and drinking wine from elaborate vessels, and listening to music and poetry, and engaging in philosophical debate through the long hours of the night. That form of the symposium belongs to men of greater wealth and education than Nikias, men who have the leisure and the resources for such evenings, men in whose households there are slave musicians and expensive pottery and vintages from other islands. But the spirit of the thing, the idea that after the meal, when the food has been largely eaten, there is a time for sitting together with wine and conversation and the simple pleasure of each other's company. This spirit is something that belongs to everyone, and it is present here too, in this modest courtyard, at this plain wooden table, under this darkening sky. After the main food is mostly eaten, Demetria brings out the small dish of stuffed figs with honey and sesame, and sets it in the center of the table, and there is a small collective pleasure in the sight and smell of it, the dark figs glistening in the lamplight, the honey around them golden and thick, the sesame seeds scattered over all like very small pale stars. Each person takes a fig and eats it slowly, and the combination of the dense, jammy sweetness of the dried fig with the walnut's slight bitterness, and the thyme honey's complex floral warmth, and the tiny crunch of the sesame seeds is genuinely good. It is a dessert of great simplicity and real pleasure, and the fact of its simplicity makes it somehow more satisfying than something complicated would be. You taste each element clearly. Nothing is hidden. The honey is honey, the fig is fig, the walnut is walnut, and together they are more than themselves, without any of them being disguised. There is a small further pour of wine as the figs are eaten, and the conversation at the table becomes slightly more expansive, not louder, never loud, but a little more rangy, a little more willing to wander. Nikias speaks briefly about something he heard in town the last time he went, something about the politics of the nearest city, something about a dispute that has been going on for some time between two families, something about the price of grain this season. These are the topics that fill the spaces of an ordinary evening in an ordinary household, and they are spoken of and listened to with the moderate interest that ordinary topics deserve. Not passion, not detachment, but a comfortable middle ground of mild engagement that does not disturb the warmth of the evening. The children, having eaten their fill, drift away from the table by degrees, the younger one lying on his mat in the sleeping room, the elder sitting in the doorway of the workroom for a while, watching the lamplight on the courtyard stones before she too goes inside to sleep, and the house becomes quieter around Nikias and Demetria, who remain at the table in the courtyard for a while after the children have gone, drinking the last of the wine and talking in the low voices of two people who have long since learned each other's silences and do not need to fill them. The night around the house is alive in its quiet way. Somewhere on the hillside above, an owl calls, the low two-note sound of the tawny owl, repeated 3 or 4 times and then silent. The goats on the upper pasture are quiet now, long since settled for the night. The sound of the insects is a constant dry presence, the chirping of cicadas having given way as the evening cooled to the softer sound of crickets, which have a more musical quality, less urgent, slower, better suited to the night. The lamp on the table burns with a steady small flame in the windless air, and its light falls on the table and the cups and the dish of figs, most of them eaten now, and on the hands of the 2 people sitting there, and on the pale stones of the courtyard floor, and everything within its circle of warmth has a completeness about it, as if the lamp were drawing a boundary around the best of the evening and holding it in place. It is not very late when Demetria rises from the table and begins the quiet work of clearing it. She does this without haste and without apparent effort, carrying things back to the kitchen one by one, the clay bowls and the cups and the serving vessels, setting them near the water jar to be washed tomorrow morning. The cooking pot with the remains of the lentil soup, there is a fair amount left, she covers and sets on the shelf near the hearth, where it will keep until tomorrow. The fish vessel is scraped clean and set aside. The bread plate is carried in, one last piece of bread on it, the heel of the round, which will soften overnight and be good in the morning with a little oil. She banks the fire in the kitchen hearth, not extinguishing it, because it is important that the fire never fully go out in a household that worships Hestia, but reducing it to a bed of glowing coals that will hold the heat until morning, when it can be built up again easily. This is done by raking the live coals together into the center of the hearth and covering them with the gray ash so that they smolder gently, maintaining their heat without needing fuel. In the morning, these banked coals will still be alive under their covering of ash, and the day will begin again with the same fire that has been burning continuously, in some sense, since the house was first inhabited. The lamp she carries from the courtyard into the main room of the house, where it will burn for a little while longer before the wick is snuffed. Its light moves through the house as she moves, warm and small and wavering, casting long shifting shadows on the walls, making the familiar rooms seem slightly different, softer, more mysterious, older somehow in the lamplight than they appear in the daylight. The walls with their smoothed plaster, the wooden chest in the sleeping room, the loom with its half-finished cloth catching the light like a pale geometric map of work in progress, the shelves with their clay vessels and folded cloths, all of it takes on in the lamplight a quality that is very beautiful in a very quiet way. Nicaeus has already gone to the sleeping room, and she hears his breathing slow and deepen as she moves through the house, and by the time she extinguishes the lamp and lies down on her own mat, the house is entirely silent except for the soft sound of sleeping and the distant low voices of the night outside. The crickets, the occasional sound of the trees on the hillside moving in a very faint breath of air. She lies in the dark, and the dark is warm and close and entirely comfortable. The day is complete. The lentil soup was good. The bread rose well. The fish was exactly what it needed to be. The figs with their honey will be spoken of tomorrow, the neighbor who came by this evening having eaten 3 of them with evident pleasure, and said something kind about the honey. These small satisfactions form a kind of quiet inventory that settles through her as she lies still, not counting them exactly, not celebrating them, only feeling them as a kind of warmth that is its own reward. The house breathes around her in the dark, its stones still holding some of the day's warmth, its air still carrying the faintest residue of the kitchen's smells, olive oil and bread and herbs and smoke. And outside the night moves through its own slow hours, the stars turning above the narrow strip of sky visible over the courtyard wall, the crickets singing their ancient unchanging song. The fire in the kitchen hearth was glowing under its ash, waiting with perfect patience for the morning. Let us stay here for a little while longer. There is no need to move on. Let the night settle over the house, and the house settle into the night, and let us simply remain in this quiet place and turn our attention gently to a few of the things we have passed through today, not to analyze them, not to explain them with any urgency, but simply to hold them for a moment in a soft light, the way you hold an object that is old and worn smooth and pleasant in the hand. Lentils, fakes. The word in Greek is so close to the Latin word for the biconvex lens that you might wonder which came first, the word for the food or the word for the optical instrument that happens to be shaped like it. What is certain is that lentils are among the oldest cultivated foods in the world, domesticated in the Near East perhaps 10,000 years ago, spreading gradually westward into Egypt and Greece and the wider Mediterranean basin, and becoming in each place so fully integrated into the daily diet that they ceased to seem like a choice and began to seem simply like a fact of life. In Greece, lentils were considered a humble food, good, nourishing, cheap, the food of farmers and working people rather than of the wealthy, who could afford meat and fine fish and elaborate preparations. A proverb existed in ancient Greece. It went something like, "Lentils for supper again." It was said as a comment on ordinary life, on the predictable rhythms of a household that does not have resources for luxury. And yet the lentil, cooked well, with good olive oil and fresh herbs, and the right amount of salt, and the patient attention of a long, slow fire, is not humble in any way that matters. It is deeply satisfying. It has been feeding people in this place for thousands of years, and it will feed people for thousands more, and its particular kind of quiet goodness does not change with fashion or with the passage of time. Olive oil. The olive tree, Olea europaea, though it had no Latin name in the time we are visiting, is one of the defining presences of the Mediterranean world. In every era, in every culture that has taken root in this landscape, the trees grow slowly and live almost incomprehensibly long. There are olive trees in Greece and in other parts of the Mediterranean that are known to be more than 2,000 years old. Trees that were already grown when the family in this house was alive. Trees whose oil their grandparents may have pressed. Trees whose roots go through layers of history, the way deep roots go through layers of soil. An ancient olive tree has a quality to it that is unlike almost any other tree. The trunk becomes gnarled and hollow with age, not dying but reorganizing itself around the loss of wood, the bark developing deep vertical fissures, the whole structure becoming more complex and more interesting the older it grows. As if age in an olive tree is not decay, but elaboration. The oil from these trees was pressed twice a year in most households, the first press yielding the finest oil, pale green and fresh, the second press yielding a darker, more robust product used for everything from lamps to skincare to the basic cooking fat of every meal. The pressing itself was done with large stone presses, heavy circular millstones rolled over the crushed olives by donkeys or by men walking slowly in circles, and the resulting paste was then placed in woven baskets and pressed again by the weight of a great wooden beam, and the oil ran out golden and slow and was collected in clay jars and left to settle, the water rising to the bottom and the oil staying on top, and when the settling was done, the oil was carefully decanted and stored in the cool darkness of the storage room, where it would keep well for many months. The taste of freshly pressed olive oil, the oil of the first press, what we would now call extra virgin, is something that is worth pausing over, because it is not quite like any other taste, and because in this time and place, it is not a luxury item or a specialty product, but simply the taste of oil as oil, which is to say the taste of something entirely and obviously itself. It is green and slightly peppery, with a bitterness at the back of the throat that is not unpleasant but is assertive, and it has a fruitiness that varies by the variety of olive and the time of the harvest. Earlier harvests yielding greener, more pungent oils, later harvests softer and more golden. Demetria has been tasting olive oil her whole life, and she would not think to describe it in these terms. She simply knows, from the moment it pours, and from the first smell of it, whether it is good, whether it is fresh, whether it is the right oil for the purpose at hand. This knowledge is not the product of learning. It is the product of living with a thing so long and so thoroughly that knowledge and sense become indistinguishable. Salt. It is worth thinking about salt, because salt is so present in this kitchen and in this cuisine that it almost disappears from notice. Salt is one of the most important traded commodities in the ancient world. It is used to preserve food, to season it, to flavor it, and in small amounts it has the quality of making all other flavors more fully themselves, of lifting and clarifying taste in a way that is impossible to describe, but immediately perceptible. The salt used in ancient Greek cooking comes primarily from salt pans along the coast, where seawater is allowed to evaporate in shallow pools, and the crystallized salt is raked up and dried and packed for transport. It is coarser and damper than the refined salt of the modern world, and it has a slightly mineral quality from the seawater it comes from, and when you hold it in your hand, it does not flow freely the way modern table salt does, but rather clumps slightly, the grains sticking together in soft clusters that break apart under pressure. It is sprinkled over food with the fingers, always, pinched between thumb and forefinger, and scattered over the pot, or the bread, or the fish, and the amount used is measured not by any fixed quantity, but by the knowledge in the hand, which knows without thinking how much is needed. Salt and olive oil together, this is the simplest possible flavoring of the ancient Greek table, and it is also, in a sense, the most essential. A piece of bread dipped in good olive oil and sprinkled with salt is not a poverty meal. It is a statement of what is fundamental and sufficient, of what needs no addition because it is already complete. In the schools of ancient Athens, in the gymnasiums where young men were trained, in the temples where priests performed their offerings, in the ships crossing the Aegean, in the farmhouses on the hillsides, everywhere in this world, the combination of bread and oil and salt is present, as reliable and as unremarkable as the light. Wine. The wine drunk in ancient Greece is not what we would drink today from a wine glass. It is rougher, less refined, lower in alcohol than modern wines, and it is almost never drunk pure, always diluted with water, typically 2 or 3 parts water to 1 part wine, sometimes more. The mixing of wine with water was a deeply held social and philosophical practice, not just a preference. Pure wine was associated with barbarians and with recklessness, with the abandonment of reason, while the mixing of wine with water was associated with civilization, with measured pleasure, with the ability to enjoy without losing oneself. The god Dionysus, who presides over wine and its pleasures, is a complex god, joyful and terrifying at once, the god of ecstasy and of theater and of the vine, a god whose gifts are real and whose dangers are equally real, and the ritual of diluting wine is in some sense an acknowledgement of that complexity, a way of accepting the gift while managing the risk. The wine drunk in this household is not refined. It is probably made from grapes grown on the hillside not far from the house, pressed in an earthenware trough by foot in the late summer, fermented in large clay vessels buried in the cool earth, and stored in amphorae sealed with a plug of cloth and pitch or clay. It has a slight sourness that comes from the natural acid of the grape and from the imperfect fermentation that happens without modern temperature control or precision, and it is dark. The grapes of this region tend toward deep color and slightly thick, and its flavor is more about depth and warmth than about elegance or complexity. It is, in short, the wine of everyday life, and it is perfectly suited to the food it accompanies, honest and direct and substantial, with enough character to add something to a meal without trying to dominate it. In the morning after this dinner, which is to say in the morning of the next ordinary day, which will be like the one before it, and like the one that will follow, steady and rhythmical and full of the same small goodnesses, The household will wake again to the brightening sky, and the fire in the kitchen hearth will be rebuilt from its banked coals, and the water will be fetched from the storage jar, and the grinding of the grain will begin again, and the bread will be set to rise, and the lentil soup left from last night will be reheated gently over the coals and eaten with fresh bread for the midday meal, because soup is always better the next day, the flavors having melded overnight into something richer than they were when first made. The dried figs, if any remain, will be eaten for the morning sweetness. The wine jug will be refilled from the storage amphora. The olive oil vessel will be replenished, and the kitchen will smell again of fire and herbs and bread, and the sound of the quern will fill the quiet morning, and the children will wake and eat their kykeon, and Nikias will go to the lower terrace to repair the stone wall he spoke of at dinner, and the day will proceed with the same unhurried regularity that all of these days possess, each one distinct in its small particulars, and yet all of them part of the same long continuous rhythm that runs through this household and through the lives of these people, a rhythm that is the rhythm of the land and the seasons and the recurring needs of bodies and the enduring pleasures of simple food made well. This is the great gift of the ancient kitchen, perhaps. Not its recipes, not its techniques, not any specific dish or ingredient, but this: the understanding that a meal does not need to be complicated to be good, that the daily practice of feeding people with care and attention is its own form of dignity, that bread and oil and lentils and a piece of good fish and a handful of preserved olives and a spoonful of honey and a few dried figs can, in the right hands and over the right fire, constitute an entire way of life's worth of nourishment, not just physical nourishment, but something deeper than that, something harder to name, the nourishment of consistency, of the familiar, of the small pleasures that are available every day and therefore never lose their value. Nothing in Demetria's kitchen is wasted. The cooking juices are soaked up with bread. The leftover soup is eaten the next day. The stale bread is soaked in water or oil and becomes something new. The ash from the fire is used in the garden. The bones of the fish, if there are any, are returned to the earth. This is not philosophy in this household. It is simply habit, the habit of people who know the value of what they have and have never been in a position to take it lightly. But the result of that habit is, in its own quiet way, a kind of wisdom, a practical wisdom inscribed in the kitchen and expressed through the daily acts of cooking and eating and clearing away and beginning again. Let us sit with these people for a little while longer in the quiet of their evening as the house settles into the night. The lamp has been extinguished now, and the only light left anywhere in the house is the faint red glow of the kitchen coals under their covering of ash, visible just barely through the kitchen doorway as a warm suggestion of warmth, a reminder that the fire is there and alive and waiting. The courtyard is dark, but not entirely dark. There are stars, many more stars than you can see from any modern city, a vast and crowded sky, the Milky Way a soft visible band across the center of it, and in their light the courtyard has a kind of monochromatic clarity, everything visible but drained of color, the pale stones and the dark shadows of the fig tree and the small shapes of the clay pots along the wall all rendered in a gentle silver gray. Inside the sleeping room, the family breathes in the slow rhythm of sleep. The house holds them, the stones holding the day's warmth and releasing it slowly through the night, the walls keeping out the slight chill that comes after midnight, the roof above, flat clay tiles on wooden beams, a simple construction that is adequate for the mild Mediterranean weather, admitting no sound but the crickets and the occasional call of the owl. The sleeping mats are comfortable in the way of familiar things. The linen cloth covering each sleeper is light and adequate. The room smells faintly of the kitchen's smoke and of the bodies resting in it, and of something that is simply the smell of a room that has been slept in by the same people for a long time and has taken on their particular warmth. In the kitchen, covered in its jar, the leftover lentil soup waits. It has already begun its overnight transformation, the flavors mingling and deepening in the cool air, the oil redistributing itself through the broth, the herbs giving up a little more of themselves to the liquid around them. By morning, the soup will be a richer and more fully integrated thing than it was at dinner, and when it is reheated slowly over the coals, it will seem to improve once more, as if the cooking is still happening even in the absence of fire, the pot continuing its quiet work through the night by means of time rather than heat. This is something to think about if you find yourself still awake and still with these thoughts. The way that certain foods improve with time, the overnight soup, the bread that is better on the second day when freshness has given way to a settled, developed flavor. The preserved olives that are good in the first week and better in the third week and very good indeed by the end of the second month. The cheese that has been pressed and salted and is now hard and dry and pungent, and nothing like the fresh curd it began as. Time, in a kitchen like this one, is not a constraint, but an ingredient, perhaps the most important and least visible ingredient of all. Nothing is rushed here, not because the people are slow or careless, but because they have understood, in the bone-deep way that comes from living close to the processes of growing and harvesting and fermenting and preserving, that good things take time, that the patience required to let things develop at their own pace is not wasted patience, but productive patience, patience that adds itself to the other ingredients and becomes part of what makes the result worth eating. The night passes, the stars move very slowly across the narrow strip of sky above the courtyard. The crickets continue their soft, persistent song. The coals in the kitchen hearth maintain their quiet glow. The house is entirely still, the stillness of a house where everyone is sleeping and nothing is required of anyone. The stillness that is the other face of the busy, purposeful stillness of the day's work. Not empty stillness, but full stillness. The stillness of a day completed, and a body at rest, and a household that has, once again, sustained itself through the patient application of daily effort and simple resources. Somewhere in the early hours of the morning, when the night is at its deepest, and the stars are at their maximum number, and the air has reached its coolest, an owl calls again from the hillside. 2 notes, low and measured, carrying through the dark with great clarity. The sound reaches the sleeping house and passes through it and continues on, and no one wakes to hear it, but it is there, the voice of the night in its ordinary course, the world continuing to be itself while the people in it rest. And somewhere on the other side of this deep dark, the morning is already being prepared invisibly by the same processes that prepare all mornings: the slow rotation of the earth, the steady approach of the sun from below the eastern horizon, the gradual fading of the stars as the darkness thins toward gray. The kitchen fire keeps its coals. The lentil soup rests in its jar. The bread heel is wrapped in cloth on the shelf. The oil sits golden and still in its small vessel. Everything is waiting, quietly, without impatience, for the light to return and the day to begin again. This is, perhaps, the deepest lesson of a kitchen like this one, of a day like this one, of a life like this one, the lesson that is not learned all at once, but absorbed over time, like warmth absorbed by stone, that the rhythms of life, when they are followed with attention and patience, have a beauty that is not dramatic or exceptional, but steady and deep. The beauty of things that continue, the beauty of the reliable and the recurring, the beauty of bread made every morning, and fire built every morning, and water drawn every morning, and the sun rising every morning over the same hills with the same quality of light, and the day unfolding in its familiar shape, and the evening coming with its gold and its cooling air and its dinner table, and the night settling over the house, and the coals glowing under their ash, and the morning coming again. There is great comfort in this. There has always been great comfort in this. In 10,000 years of people sitting near fires and preparing food from simple ingredients and feeding their families in the quiet of the evening, this comfort has been the constant thing, not the particular ingredients, not the particular techniques, not the particular languages spoken around the table, but this: the fact of the fire, the fact of the food, the fact of the people gathered around both, the fact of the day ending in nourishment and rest, and the promise of the morning implicit in the banked coals and the covered bread and the still oil in its jar. Let the kitchen be still now. Let the fire rest under its ash. Let the lentil soup rest in its jar, and the bread rest on its shelf, and the honey crystallize slowly in its clay vessel, and the olives sit in their brine in the cool darkness of the storage room. Let the house breathe quietly around its sleeping family. Let the hillside above the house hold its olive trees with their deep ancient roots and their silver gray leaves that will turn in the morning breeze when the morning comes, and let the goats sleep in their pen on the upper pasture, and let the owl on the hillside settle into silence as the deepest part of the night takes hold. Let everything be still. There is no hurry here. There never was. The morning will come when it comes, and the fire will be rebuilt when it is rebuilt, and the bread will be made when it is made, and the day will unfold in its slow and gentle shape, and the evening will come again with its dinner and its lamplight and its brief conversation and its sweet figs with honey, and the night will follow the evening as it always does, and the sleep will come as it always does, and the morning after the sleep will arrive as it always has, and all of this will go on repeating, quietly and without urgency, for longer than anyone can imagine, the simplest and most durable of all human stories, the story of a fire and a kitchen and a family and a meal. Close your eyes now, if you haven't already. You are here in this warm and quiet place, far from the noise of the modern world, in a small stone house on a hillside in ancient Greece, and the only sounds are the crickets and the distant soft sound of the wind in the olive trees, and the very faint whisper of the fire in the kitchen keeping its coals alive through the dark. There is nothing you need to do. There is nowhere you need to be. The lentil soup is made, and it is good, and the bread is made, and it is cooling, and the figs have been eaten, and the honey has been spooned, and the wine has been poured and diluted and drunk slowly in the evening light. And now the night has come, and the house is sleeping, and the fire is waiting, and everything is in its right place and at rest. Slowly, the sound of the crickets becomes just part of the darkness. Slowly, the image of the kitchen and the courtyard and the pale stone and the lamplight softens and recedes, not disappearing but settling back, becoming a kind of warmth behind the eyes rather than a picture in front of them. The smell of the olive oil and the bread and the herbs is still there, faintly, a warmth in the air, and the sound of the fire, that low, steady, barely audible sound of coals resting under their ash, continues very softly, a sound that is almost more felt than heard, a vibration in the air that is the sound of warmth itself. Sleep now. You have been in the kitchen all day. You have ground the grain and baked the bread and tended the fire and made the lentil soup and prepared the fish with olives and wine and herbs and laid out the simple, beautiful dinner in the courtyard in the last of the evening light. You have done well. The family is fed. The fire is banked. The house is quiet. The stars are out above the courtyard. Everything is as it should be, and everything will be as it should be in the morning too, and there is nothing to hold on to and nothing to let go of, only this, the warmth and the quiet, and the slow, sure approach of a dreamless and perfect rest. The lentils were good tonight. They were very good. Good night.